Hi, Shir.
היי ליאור, שלום, שלום כולם.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, great.
Yes.
Good. Okay. It's 8 where you are right now, right? We can start now. Is this a good time to start? Okay.
Yes, we can start. Thank you, Geshe. Thank you everyone for joining. Reminding everyone again, I posted here on the chat for a donation for Dana. You can follow the link. Thank you, Geshe, for the teachings.
Sure. Okay, great. So let's start as usual. We do a little bit of breathing, a few minutes, and then I guide you through setting the motivation, and then we do the prayer together. Okay. All right, so let's start. Just a few moments of breathing meditation. And then to receive the inspiration of the Buddha himself and all the great beings such as Chandakirti and so forth. Visualize that they're all in the space in front of you. The center is the Buddha, wearing the saffron robes of a monk, as an embodiment of wisdom and method. And next to the Buddha are Nagarjuna, Asanga, Chandakirti, all the great Indian Panditas or the great masters. Serving as an inspiration to us. And surrounding them are all sentient beings. All around us are all sentient beings. And then think, we have this great opportunity here to learn about the Dharma, about our own mind, about Buddhist psychology. Not only for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so generate the motivation. May this become one of those numerous causes this session today, so that I attain the enlightened state of a Buddha, for the welfare of all sentient beings. So with this motivation, let's recite the prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then there are 4 immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay, all right, so let's start today's lesson again on the text. Of course, Chandakirti's entry into the middle way. I'm a little bit struggling about how fast to go through the text. On one hand, you may want to go quickly through it and be done with it, possibly, but of course a text like that, you just can't do that. And especially in the beginning, it just takes some time because otherwise it'll be incomplete, and I'm not actually presenting everything. I just can't, because that would be like, well, the way we studied it, it was 3 years of every day, the whole day just with this text. So it takes really that long, and we won't have that much time, and I'm not expecting it to take that long, but in the beginning it just takes a little longer. A few things need to be clarified, because otherwise it's hard to understand the rest. So You'll see at my pace right now, it's quite slow, reverse every time. But I'm thinking it takes as long as it takes. So let's just do it that way. I don't want to rush through it. I could, but then in the end, you could just read it on your own, basically. All right, so the main subject, we'll complete this today, is still great compassion. Great compassion, unlike emptiness, is easier understood, but it still requires quite a bit of explanation. But even more so, it requires a lot of practice to actually bring it into our daily life. And so for the last few weeks, I've asked you to meditate on great compassion every day for at least, 20 times if you can. Well, meditate doesn't mean you should leave everything aside, but every now and then remember great compassion. Remember the thought, may all sentient beings be free from suffering. So this is really how this is practiced, different to emptiness. Of course, emptiness, you reflect upon it again and again, but it's more understanding. Emptiness is more about understanding the object itself, which is the lack of inherent existence of phenomena. So you meditate on the object, which is emptiness. With great compassion, you don't take compassion as your object. You don't think about compassion itself. No, you generate compassion. You meditate on it by way of allowing it to arise in your own mind. That is the best way. Of course, you could meditate on compassion, reflect on it. What is its object? How should you generate it, etc. So make it your object initially to understand it better. But that doesn't require much time. What you need to spend most time on is generate compassion in your own heart. And this is why I've asked you to do this. If you remember 20 times, that's great. If you can do more, it doesn't need much. You can just be driving in a car, you can be walking on the street, you see another person and just generate the thought, may this person, a feeling of closeness, of like endearment or affection towards that person, and the wish, may they and all other sentient beings be free from suffering. All right. And as we went through last time, we talked a lot about understanding, not just having that wish for them to be free from suffering, but understanding that they're just like us in the sense that they have basic misapprehension of reality, their misapprehension of the I, perceiving the I to exist solidly, inherently, giving rise to a misperception of body and mind as if inherently and intrinsically existent, and of course giving rise to the exaggerating attitude, believing myself to be more important, my own happiness to be more important, self-cherishing, anger, attachment, all the other different types of afflictive emotions. So Chandrakirti himself, he talks about, first of all, he says compassion is the root of everything, of all the different practices in the Dharma. He talks about compassion being important in the beginning when you start practicing, when you're practicing, when you're in the process, as you develop your mind, and of course it's important at the very end. And then in verse 3, we've gotten to verse 3, it talks about, the causes, as I just said. First of all, misapprehension of the I, misapprehension of mine, and attachment to I and mine, to make it short. But of course, he also talks about the example, I mentioned it last time, the water wheel. There's a water wheel, there's a bucket, uses the analogy of that. And when you let the water, the bucket fall into the well, it's very easy for it to drop down. It starts off with saying, just as the bucket is attached by a rope to the water wheel, we are attached to our karma and afflictions. It talks about just as the person who rotates, just as the bucket and the water wheel under the control of the person turning the wheel, in the same way we are under the control of our own mind, and so forth. So there's another picture of a water wheel and buckets. Here, more than one bucket. Get this analogy. So it's a picture that Iki made available. So the point is just this analogy, this very poetic way of describing our situation. Just as the bucket easily goes down, we're easily thrown into negative states. It's so much harder to experience positive states and so forth. So as part, of course, of generating compassion, to understand that's not just true for ourselves, that's true for everyone else. So much easier to fall into difficult states. It's so much harder to get out of it. So much easier to accumulate non-virtue. So much harder to generate positive karma and so forth. So in the way I described last time, to bring that into your practice, if you just walk on the street, you're busy with other things, bring to mind, this is the condition of ourselves, but of all other sentient beings, being trapped with regard to their misperception. And so therefore, again, taking it further, not just the wish, may they be free from all this, but may I be able to do something. May I be able to do something so I'd be able to liberate sentient beings. Well, become a Buddha, of course, that would be the goal, for the benefit of all sentient beings. But then with today's verse, it's not just talking about compassion, so this sense of affection, the sense of closeness, whoever there is, and the wish for them to be free from all their problems, etc. But also it goes along with an understanding of reality, which makes compassion so much more powerful. So here, it's part of verse number 4. And again, the author uses a lot of analogies, very poetic kind of language. He's talking about, he's saying, beings are like reflections of the moon in rippling water, seeing them as fleeting and as devoid of intrinsic nature. So what is he saying here? He's literally, I mean, Thupten Jinpa, he uses the word beings here. Literally in Tibetan, it says wandering beings. Talking of us, I explained to you that word in Tibetan. It has this connotation of us. We're just wandering from one situation to the next. If you take it over lifetimes, well, from one life to the next without much control, or even in our life, in our own life, wandering from one situation to the next, one problem, one difficulty. So we're like wandering beings. Sentient beings are like wandering living beings. So they are like reflections of the moon in moving water. So if you imagine a clear body of water, and the moon is reflected in that clear body of water. And the water is there's like a wind blowing. Because of that wind, the water is rippling, it's rippled. They're like little waves in the water. So seeing them as moving, so you see this reflection, it's moving, okay, because of the ripples. And at the same time, as devoid of intrinsic nature. Seeing sentient beings, so seeing migratory beings as like the reflection of the moon, it's moving and it's devoid of intrinsic nature. So these two lines, they talk about the fact that sentient beings are impermanent and they do not exist the way they appear. And that understanding combined with compassion makes compassion so much more powerful. In what sense? Well, first of all, how does compassion arise? I've talked about this before, but we need to go over this again and again, understanding what the other person is going through to get a sense. What is it? Even we don't know exactly, but just the fact that there's the misapprehension, there's a basic misperception with regard to the self. So then no wonder people are selfish and self-cherishing. Can't help it because of that basic misapprehension. And then from there, we can get a sense of what they're going through from our own experience, for instance, and also from what we observe, of course, what's going on around us. And that may actually lead to a feeling of, well, depression. That would be the worst case scenario, but being overwhelmed by all that suffering. Because of course, before we can wish other sentient beings to be free from suffering, we need to face it. We need to face our own, but also look around what other people go through. One part of compassion that helps us to not being sucked into that kind of sense of hopelessness and all this problem and suffering is this sense of endearment and a sense of strength. I want to do something. May I be able to do something? I will do something. So it's like compassion is an understanding. It goes along with an understanding of what sentient beings go through, but also it's not just an aspiration, but a determination. I have the opportunity now. I will do something. So it gives already this determination, this sense of well, yeah, strength of mind, strength of heart, gives us a strength that counteracts or goes as a force against that sense of, oh, it's all so terrible what's going on around me. That's one aspect. But at the same time, understanding is also really important in terms of how do things exist. So if I see another person suffer terribly, whichever way that manifests, there are certain things that I would find more terrible than another person when I observe that. So for everyone it's different, but also the fact it's changing. It's not always the same. When we hear suffering, there's automatically a sense there's this solid, unchanging suffering. It's more on an emotional level, but nonetheless, not necessarily rationally, but we see a problem and there's automatically a response of, oh, it's like this terrible thing and it's unchanging, right? Not spoken in those words. We don't even have the words on this emotional basis to think that way, but there's a sense of it's always going to be like that. So to counteract that, to also remember everything is fleeting. It's like situations come and go. We come and go. Our body, of course, changes all the time. So does the body of other sentient beings. The mind is changing all the time. So situations are similar, but they're never exactly the same. So suffering basically comes and goes. That is also very effective in terms of overcoming the sense of being overwhelmed by the suffering of sentient beings. Also to understand, well, it's the result of causes and conditions, and the wish for them to be free from suffering, that's not some kind of unrealistic way of thinking. No, because it's changing. It is changing. It's got causes and conditions, and those causes and conditions can be removed. And if I remove them for myself first, then I can go out and help other sentient beings to remove them as well. However long that takes, but with that determination, it can be changed. Therefore, I need to do something. I will change my situation, and then I will do it for others, because that's the nature of their mind, the nature of, well, sentient beings. Therefore, the second type of, and I talked about this before, as of the 3 types of compassion. 3 types of compassion. Now, previously, we talk about compassion that merely focuses on observing sentient beings. That's just ordinary compassion, just doing what I just described without reflecting on the impermanence of sentient beings. No, reflecting on their suffering, generating a sense of endearment, of closeness, just like me, sense of closeness, therefore, and then the wish for them to be free from that suffering, or the wish, may I be able to help them to get rid of that suffering. That is described as compassion that focuses merely on sentient beings. But another type is compassion that focuses on dharmas, on phenomena, or on existence. You can also translate it on an existent situation. So it's not just focusing on the suffering of sentient beings, etc., but you also bring in wisdom, which doesn't mean that compassion itself thinks of, for instance, the impermanence of sentient beings. No, you generate compassion, but at the same time as you have compassion, another mind reflects upon the impermanence of sentient beings. In fact, as it's described in the commentaries, first you reflect upon the changing nature of sentient beings, of their impermanence. Think of sentient beings' minds and bodies, they're constantly changing, and therefore for them they undergo sufferings over and over. Of course, they don't remain the same, but also their happiness doesn't last. So to reflect upon their situation, being trapped by their misapprehension. And at the same time, while thinking of their impermanence, you also generate, or once you have that mind, one aspect, the mind that is reflecting upon or becomes aware of the impermanence of sentient beings, another mind is generated that wishes them to be free from suffering. So you have two minds operating simultaneously. One just wishes for sentient beings to be free from suffering. The other one is reflecting on the impermanence of sentient beings. And they actually can operate simultaneously. That is described as compassion that observes the impermanence of sentient beings. Observes dharmas, or I guess you can really say existent aspects with regard to sentient beings. That's not how it's called. It's called compassion that observes dharmas as in that which is existent. But really what it means is it's compassion that focuses on all sentient beings, which at the same time, so here great compassion focuses on all sentient beings, which at the same time arises with another mind that understands sentient beings' impermanence. And it can also know other things. Impermanence is actually just an example. You could also, for instance, again, take sentient beings and understand that they don't have a permanent, independent I, although they believe there is such an I, but it doesn't exist. So anything about sentient beings that accords with reality other than emptiness, any fact about sentient beings, if you reflect upon that and at the same time generate great compassion, that great compassion is called great compassion that focuses or that observes dharmas, or anything that's existed. That's the second type. And the third type of compassion, and I mentioned that before, is the type where you reflect on the emptiness of sentient beings and also generate compassion. So understanding they don't exist inherently, they don't exist in and of themselves. So it's not just an existent fact about sentient beings, but you're taking it to the ultimate level, understand they don't exist inherently. And again, of course, if you understand that their sufferings don't exist independently and solidly the way they appear to us, very effective, again, for compassion to be more realistic, to be light, not having that sense of darkness and it's all dark and inherent intrinsic suffering. No, it's changing, it's not inherent, it's not intrinsic, it's merely labeled, it's not in and of itself existent, and so forth. And in that way, it takes away that misapprehension, and compassion works that much better with an understanding of reality. And that third type of compassion that operates together with an understanding of sentient beings' ultimate nature, is called compassion that focuses on the unobservable, which means emptiness. It's not observable with an ordinary mind, basically. All right, so you have three types of compassion. Compassion that just does its thing as compassion itself. Then you have compassion that focuses on the impermanence of sin. No, you have compassion that at the same time as it's there, as it's active, arises with the mind understanding the impermanence of sentient beings as an example, or the fact that they don't exist solidly or that they suffer. Impermanence is actually just an example. That is the second type of compassion. And the third type is where you have great compassion, but you focus on emptiness. So, in other words, the second type of compassion understands a conventional truth, a conventional aspect of sentient beings. The third type of compassion is a compassion, well, it's not the compassion itself, but another mind that knows the ultimate aspect of sentient beings. That's really the difference. Okay? All right. And that's described here. Impermanence is the main aspect that is mentioned here. So here, how does it work? The reflection of the moon in the rippling water, that is like sentient beings who are changing. The rippling water, okay, is like sentient beings who are caught in the ocean of suffering. Okay, so the ocean is like the body of water. sentient beings are like the reflection in there. And this changing, the water, the rippling water, the moving water is just as sentient beings that are changing. The emptiness, the reflection of the moon in the water, it also symbolic, not just this changing kind of aspect or appearance of the moon, which symbolizes impermanence, also the fact that the moon, the reflection of the moon in the water, it appears to be the moon, but it's not the moon. So likewise, sentient beings appear to exist inherently, but they do not exist inherently. So in that way here, these two lines, beings, wandering beings, are like reflections of the moon in rippling water, okay, in the sense that you see them as fleeting, as impermanence because of the rippling, the movement of the water, and devoid of intrinsic nature in that they appear to exist intrinsically, but they do not exist in that way, right? So that is really what's described here in these two lines. So as Lama Tsongkhapa, for instance, says, like, he talks about the reflection, like I said, moment by moment, on a moment-to-moment basis, that is transient and at the same time, well, empty of inherent existence. The wind is the wind of the wrong view, okay? And so you can hear, it's like there's a very extensive explanation here given by Lama Tsongkhapa in his commentary. I don't think we need to go through all this. You can totally go into all these details, but I don't know, if you just reflect upon those two aspects, become aware of their impermanence and the fact that sentient beings don't exist in the way they appear. And now again, if you have that understanding, what I just talked about, how can you bring that into your own daily life? It's not that difficult. As I said, as part of this class we're having, what I want you to do throughout this week, and I try to do this myself. It's not just I'm asking you to do things, but I'm also trying, of course, to go through the same aspects. And then to take for this week, instead of going through like we did last time, we talked about what are the causes when you see other sentient beings, when you remember great compassion. This time to bring into awareness the fact that sentient beings are changing. So as you go around, you see other sentient beings, you hear about other sentient beings. Every now and then have a brief thought, generating compassion. If you can make it longer, great. If not, however long you can do, and to reflect on their impermanence, constantly changing. They don't exist the way they appear. Even though I said impermanence, it can also mean other aspects, but mainly they talk about impermanence, and I think that's good enough. And if you can, to then, once you brought to mind not just the fact they're changing, but also the fact that they don't exist the way they appear, to remind yourself of the fact that they appear to exist solidly as intrinsic beings, but they're merely labeled on the basis of body and mind. So to generate the wish for them to be free from suffering, because although they're merely labeled, but those labeled beings, they don't want to suffer. They don't deserve to suffer, just as no one, myself included, deserves to suffer. And again, based on that understanding, having just brought it to mind, to generate the wish, may they be free from suffering. All right. So this is the only way to make this actually in any way effective. If you understand this intellectually, yeah, that's the first step. Of course, it's important, but the only way to really make changes is to bring this into our own life. And what's the better way than have a whole week and test it? Take the, what did I call it? The petri dish of your own mind. Okay, your own mind is your petri dish. It's your laboratory, like where you do all these scientific kind of experiments. Well, great compassion is the root of everything. It's the root of all our qualities. It's the root of our own happiness, the happiness of others. Well, let's find out. Does it help us on a daily basis to deal with problems better, to maybe deflect from all our own problems, and every now and then consider other sentient beings, and just how does it make us feel? Is there a difference? That's the only way we can continue with our understanding of all the other aspects here. Otherwise, it's just theory. All right. So therefore, that's really those two lines here describing. So I'm just quickly going through the commentary to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. All right, so here, those are the first, what are they, 3.5 verses, I believe. How many are they? No, it's verse, 3.5 verses. They're all about compassion. Now, compassion, what kind of compassion? Well, it includes compassion that you initially generate. Okay, of course, here it's talking about different means of how to generate compassion in terms of understanding what sentient beings go through as a means to then generate compassion, to also gain a better understanding of sentient beings' nature, to bring together compassion and wisdom. So that's one aspect. But it's also talking about, well, compassion, yes. So initially, those first actually 3.5 lines, they talk about the first stages of a bodhisattva. In other words, it talks about what is called the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. Those are the two first levels. Once you have generated the wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, with this aspiration, you have entered the Mahayana path. And now on the path of accumulation, as the words basically imply, you accumulate whatever is necessary to move on to the next stage, to the next level, basically, in particular with regard to understanding reality. And then the next level is path of preparation. So you become even more actively prepared in terms of generating the states of mind, such as deep levels of concentration, for instance, in order to become prepared for the next level, which is called the path of seeing, where you directly experience reality. So to put it briefly, on the first two levels, path of accumulation and path of preparation, you prepare, you get ready for the third level, path of seeing, where you directly experience reality. That is where you understand how phenomena really exist. You actually experience that. It's no longer an intellectual understanding, it is a direct experience. That's where what you work towards when you're on the first two levels. And those first two levels are described basically in those first 3.5 verses. And what happens with verse number, well, after 3.5 verses, so verse number 4, the last two lines, line 3 and 4, which we're going to go through, that describes, actually, this is where the text starts, because where does it start? It starts with the path of seeing. From then onwards, what Chandrakirti does in this text, it talks about a person, a bodhisattva, who has reached that direct understanding of reality. It talks about that, but of course it talks about a lot of other things as well. That's kind of the foundation. In what sense? Well, you've heard already, for someone who is a bodhisattva, who aims towards enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings, there are different levels that they go through. And those levels are called path. We're quite familiar with that word. It's mental states that, just as a path leads you somewhere, these mental states lead you towards enlightenment. However, there's another word that is used to describe levels, and that word is called ground, like the ground of the floor, for instance. And it has exactly that meaning. Bhumi means ground. That's another way of describing different levels, different mental states that are like developmental levels, like levels of development that you go through to then eventually reach the goal of enlightenment. And these grounds, they're called grounds because unlike the path, the path just has a different meaning, although a path is also a ground and a ground is a path. But the path is explained from the point of view of taking you somewhere. Whereas a ground means it's a basis for positive qualities. If you've reached a certain psychological level, if your mind has transformed to a certain degree, then it's easier to generate generosity, to be generous, to engage in ethical conduct, to be patient, and so forth. So a ground is, like I said, another way of talking about a mental state that now serves as a basis for certain good qualities. Now, having said all this, previously I talked about someone who's generated the wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. They enter the Bodhisattva vehicle, the Bodhisattva path, if you like. And as I said, you first go through 2 levels, path of accumulation, path of preparation, during which you prepare your mind towards directly understanding reality. And once you've gone through those stages, at some point you reach the path of seeing, which means now you experience reality as it is. You've understood how you yourself, other phenomena actually exist. You have a direct experience of that. But that's actually not enough. You now need to deepen that. You need to become familiar with that. Which is why once you've understood how phenomena really exist on the path of seeing, you now become more familiar with that. You familiarize yourself more and more with that direct experience of emptiness, which is described as the path of meditation. So in other words, before you can become a Buddha, there are 2 levels when you don't realize emptiness directly yet, path of accumulation, path of preparation. And then you have 2 levels where you directly experience emptiness. But you still have to go through those 2 levels before you can become a Buddha. Path of seeing, path of meditation. All right. So in that way, you can divide a Bodhisattva into a Bodhisattva who's either on the path of accumulation or the path of preparation. Or you have a Bodhisattva who's either on the path of seeing or the path of meditation. The Bodhisattva who's on the first 2 levels has not experienced emptiness yet. The Bodhisattva who's on the last 2 levels, path of seeing and path of meditation, that kind of Bodhisattva has directly experienced emptiness, has understood how phenomena really exist. Now, do we have names for those 2 different levels of Bodhisattvas? Oh, absolutely. Tibetans, of course, Tibetan Buddhism, or Nalanda Buddhism, as it's also called, everything is categorized and so forth. So we distinguish between non-Arya Bodhisattvas and Arya Bodhisattvas. The word Arya, or like a special person, Arya refers to someone who's experienced reality. If that person is an Arya, called Arya Bodhisattva. That's on the latter 2 level, path of seeing and path of meditation. On the first 2 levels, path of accumulation and path of preparation, you're not an Arya Bodhisattva. You're an ordinary Bodhisattva, still incredible, but in terms of the realization of ultimate reality, that level has not yet been reached. Okay, so you have that simple, not that complicated distinction. And as I said, the first 3.5 verses talking about compassion, explicitly talking about compassion, the way we've just done, they describe those first 2 levels. But then with verse number 3.5 or verse 4, the last 2 lines, after that's done, so it's verse 4, last 2 lines, which we're going to go through. Now, from now on, the whole text, so the introduction is done with, that part is done with, and now the text starts, and now it talks about a Bodhisattva on the level of the path of seeing, the path of meditation. And that way, of course, it talks about so many other things as well, but that's kind of like the platform. This is the basis. It's the names of the chapters are basically on the basis of that kind of Bodhisattva. And what it does is, what the text does is, it describes this bodhisattva by dividing those path of seeing, path of preparation, path of seeing and path of meditation, those two levels into 10 grounds, into 10 levels, 10 grounds. And in each chapter, one ground is explained. That's it, right? On each level, on each chapter, this has actually 11 chapters, because the 11th chapter is the Buddha level. It talks just briefly about what it means to be a Buddha. That's the 11th chapter, but it's got, most importantly, 10 chapters. And each chapter talks about one ground. But it doesn't say that much about their grounds. What it really says, to summarize it, what do you mainly focus on in terms of your practice on the first ground? Generosity. Because each ground is associated with one of the 10 perfections, the 6 perfections plus 4. And it's nothing totally unfamiliar to you. In the first chapter, it talks about what is generosity? How do you practice generosity? Okay, those are not very long. The first chapter is not very long. We're just starting with this chapter. So it talks about generosity, etc. The next chapter talks about ethical conduct, also not very long. So the first 5 chapters are actually relatively short. The 6th chapter is the longest. It's like most of the text consists of the 6th chapter, which is wisdom. And of course, this is why this text, there's a lot on emptiness. This text talks a lot about emptiness, but what's so special about it, it brings in the path. It talks about compassion, it talks about generosity, about patience, and so forth. So you get a complete sense of the entire path. And it is, as part of the study of Madhyamika, we study this text. We could also use Nagarjuna's text, Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, which is the text on emptiness. But it's only on emptiness. It's only on emptiness. And so, because we need both, we don't just need emptiness, we also need the emotional part to make it complete and not just focus on emptiness. So this text gives us this opportunity. And what a beautiful way. We started off with compassion. That was like 3 weeks of compassion. If you really put into practice what I've suggested for you to do, you've had 3 solid weeks of every day generating compassion. Now, I want you to continue with this. Definitely for the following weeks. You've had your instructions in terms of understanding the impermanence of sentient beings, bringing that to mind, and bringing to mind the fact that they don't appear the way they exist. Okay, we'll do the meditation on that today anyway. So it gives you a sense how to think. And again, as I said, as part of your morning practice, start off your day reflecting on that. And then throughout the day, bring it back to mind, again and again through mindfulness. Okay, that's the only way you make that text really effective. Okay, great. Now, with regard now to the following part, we're now starting, this is still part of the introduction of the, as it's called, homage, pay homage to compassion. So Chandrakirti does not pay homage to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to heroes, solitary, like these great beings. No, he pays homage, he pays his respect to the mind that is the root of all those, which is compassion. Okay, giving us a good sense, Buddhism is all about compassion. Compassion on an emotional level, it's like the juice. It keeps it moist. It keeps the wisdom, it moistens the wisdom so that our wisdom, our understanding of reality can grow. In what way? In so many ways. And this is what the experiment, this is what I want you to discover. First of all, it calms you down. If we generate compassion, we get nervous and unhappy if we're just concerned with ourselves. The more it's all about me, the unhappier we are, the more nervous we are. It all comes down becoming calmer, becoming more content. That's what compassion does. But compassion is also in accordance with reality. It works in accordance. So first of all, if you focus on other sentient beings and there's less focus on the self, it's so much easier to understand there is no inherent I in the first place, because our misapprehension of reality, our self-cherishing is not based on a conventional I. It is based, that is, it holds on to a totally fabricated I that can't exist. And if you practice compassion, your mind gets into the habit of focusing on other suffering. It's so much easier to realize, well, there was never this fabricated, I was never there, I just fabricated it. And my whole me has been revolving around a fantasy. What a relief. So compassion can kind of almost like warm the room, warm up, make our wisdom kind of, it's almost like the warmth that makes our wisdom more flexible, and it makes it easier for our wisdom to really sprout. Okay, so in a way, it's kind of, compassion carries everything. And if you listen to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings, how often he uses the word compassion, compassion, compassion. Yes, he also talks about bodhicitta, but bodhicitta is really compassion with a goal. Bodhicitta is compassion with the goal of enlightenment as a means to an end. Means to which end? To fulfill your aspiration, which is compassion, to bring happiness to all sentient beings. So the whole text should be carried with compassion. So let's not lose this. But at the same time, as we go through these chapters, generosity based on compassion, ethical conduct based on compassion. So to not lose sight of that important type of mind. Okay, but to return to the explanation of these levels, as I said, this text is divided into 11 chapters. 10 of those talk about these 10 levels that you go through while you're on the path of seeing and the path of meditation. To put it very simply, basically there's a slightly different explanation sometimes, but never mind, to keep it simple, on the path of seeing, you're on the first ground. On the path of meditation, you're on ground 2, 3, 4, 5. So really it's, when I say the path of seeing and the path of meditation is divided into 10 grounds, yeah, that's true, but to be more specific, path of seeing is the first ground, path of meditation is divided into 9 grounds, 2 until 10. Okay, so in that way, it's just another way of dividing the path of, instead of dividing the path of seeing, the path of meditation into 2 paths, you divide it into 10 grounds. Okay, that's what this text does. And it'll be clear what each point, what do you do on each level? What happens? Like I already mentioned, on the first level, you focus on meditating on generosity. Okay, so we learn about generosity, what it is, how you practice it, why it's important, etc. So it's lovely. We can do a lot of meditation on that. Next is ethical conduct, then patience, and so forth. Until, of course, we get to wisdom, which obviously it's a lot about emptiness. All right. Now, before we actually get to the first part of the chapter, so generosity, there are a few verses, and what do? They say in general, they talk about in general, the actual body of the text is now starting. It's talking about what does that first ground mean? What are the qualities? What qualities do you eventually, what are the qualities you attain? What's special about a bodhisattva who's reached that level? What's special about that person? What are the specific qualities? In what sense is this person? In what sense does this person outshine other beings? It just gives this general characteristics. It talks about certain qualities. It's not hard to understand. It's just a few verses. And yeah, most of those are pretty straightforward. All right, so as I said, there are 10 grounds. 10 grounds, causal grounds, they're on the, as a bodhisattva, and then you have the resultant one ground, that one resultant ground, that's the Buddha level. All right. Now, here, what does it say in verse 4? After we talked about compassion, now it says, the bodhisattva's mind falls under compassion's sway, yearning to set free every transmigrating being. That's not just true for a bodhisattva on the first ground, but definitely you see Bodhisattva, very important on that ground. Of course, great compassion, very important. Through intense dedication, and that's verse 5, okay, first 2 lines of verse 5. I'll go through it again one more time, but it goes on to say, through intense dedication with Samantabhadra's prayers, the king of prayers, Samantabhadra's prayers, he abides in perfect joy. This is called the first ground. Okay, so again, verse 4, what is it telling us about this bodhisattva? Driven by great compassion, under compassion's sway, yearning to set free every transmigrating being. He's got the word transmigrating being, not just being, but beings wandering around. It's that motivation. May I be there for the welfare of all sentient beings. I know right now there's very little I can do, but I have the wish to develop my mind, to generate my mind, to yearn for the welfare of all sentient beings. So a bodhisattva, of course, on that level, there's already a bodhisattva can do, but not bodhisattva on that level is not yet Buddha, and therefore still yearning to reach the state of a Buddha. Okay, so they fall under the sway, so compassion sway, yearning to set free every transmigrating being. That's one quality. And also here it says through intense dedication with Samantabhadra's prayers. Samantabhadra prayers. Samantabhadra was a bodhisattva at the time of the Buddha who's associated with great, making great offerings, making a lot of prayers, dedicating for the welfare of all sentient beings. So he was famous for that. So that's why we talk about prayers that dedicate themselves, that dedicate all their virtue towards enlightenment, etc. So the king of prayers, for instance, is called the Samantabhadra prayer. So it's one of those these really important prayers where you are able to make very powerful aspirations that benefit you to eventually reach your goal. Prayer, I don't know, in other traditions, of course, we use the Tibetan word, the English word prayer here, although I'm not sure it exactly means the same as a prayer we associate with other religions. There's great similarities, but there's also a difference. A prayer is basically, it can be, of course, directed towards Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It is directed at something. Just as in other religions, it's directed at God, for instance. But it's kind of not saying like, God, please do such and such, because that's, as we all know, in Buddhism, of course, a very important idea is that my own suffering, I'm the only one who can really remove my own suffering. I'm the only one who can create all the causes and conditions for my own welfare. It's in my own hand. And you may wonder, well, why do I want to become a Buddha for the welfare of all sentient beings? They have to do it on their own. Yes, that is true, but I can assist them. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can assist us in our own case, and we can assist others. So it's not that we're totally in a bubble that others cannot affect us, their teachings cannot affect us. In the end, we have to practice, we have to generate wisdom, we have to generate compassion. So the main responsibility lies with us with regard to our own spiritual development, but others can help us. Just in daily life, of course, it's my responsibility to look after my own health. I'm the one eating the food. I'm the one taking the medicine. I'm the one doing sports, etc., to keep fit, to do exercise, etc., to keep fit. But others can help me, of course. There are doctors, there are people advising us, there's literature, etc. So basically, with a prayer, we're also requesting help to a certain degree, but it's mainly setting our mind in a certain direction. This aspiration, may I, such and such, may I become a Buddha, for instance, for the welfare of all sentient beings. May, in the future, by someone just hearing my name, feel happiness. Because of the power of the mind, if I have these prayers, and they don't need to be spoken, it's mainly mental, again and again and again, I create the causes for that to happen. So Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in particular, they make all these strong aspirational prayers. I mean, what a beautiful prayer. May one day in the future, whenever that's going to be, my presence bring forth happiness in other sentient beings' minds. Isn't that a beautiful prayer? And if that was really become true, you create the causes such that one day you walk into a room and people go, oh, isn't that nice to see that person? You don't even know why, but you feel calmer, you feel more peaceful. And how many people talk about that when they see His Holiness the Dalai Lama? How many people say, wow, I had this encounter. I know this comedian in Germany, he's quite famous. And he lost his mother when he was really young. And his mom was suffering from depression. And this comedian, he became such a brilliant comedian because he tried to make his mother laugh. He loved his mother so much, so he tried his bit to make her laugh, make her laugh. And when he was about 9 or 11, she killed herself. And it was so hard for him, that whole thing. But he became an incredible comedian because he had practiced with his mom. And he has just published his biography, and it's just a story. And he tells of a story when he met His Holiness. And he's not a Buddhist. He's not interested. He just happened to be in the room where there were people who had an audience, and he was there. And they were like, "You want to come along?" He's like, "Sure, I've heard of the Dalai Lama. Let's come." And His Holiness, everything he said, it was like a room of people, I don't know, a limited number. And he said something to everyone, and everyone walked away with a special something. Oh, I'm getting emotional when I just tell of this. So in this case, he walked up to His Holiness, and His Holiness said, "It's so difficult to lose your mother." He didn't know anything about this comedian. He just talked about, and he said this comedian was like, whoa, it hit him. And he went home and he cried for 2 weeks. And after that, he was over it. He was finally over. And he talked so beautifully about His Holiness, the presence of His Holiness, those words. And he was able to move past this, right? So this is what His Holiness, the effect His Holiness has on people. It's incredible. It's beyond words. So these are beings like that. And we can all become like that. We have the same mind, same basis as His Holiness, as the Buddha, as these great beings. So to make these prayers, and here we're talking about, yes, 10th ground, no, first ground bodhisattvas. But of course, we're talking about them not because there's some cool guy we're learning about. No, to learn we can become just like that. So they make these prayers over and over. Okay, so our practice of compassion is not just understanding the impermanence of sentient beings, but also this prayer. May one day I be able to help this person. You come along a person, you see them sitting there somewhere on a bench, or they look on their own, they're just sitting there, whatever. And you have that thought, one day, may I be able to help this person. May my presence, by just seeing me, just hearing my name, bring them happiness and so forth. Okay, so those are the prayers. You get a sense of these prayers. You make these very powerful prayers at all times. These thoughts, may I benefit them. You dedicate everything towards your own enlightenment. You dedicated these prayers. I mean, there's like a whole teaching that was once given by Geshe and Kelsang where he talks about these prayers. It's like when I started listening to them, I was like, how great can that be? But basically, it was amazing. These beautiful, inspiring. It really gives you a sense how these bodhisattvas dedicate everything towards sentient beings. And it gives you a sense, well, maybe I can do that a little bit, 5 minutes a day, and then 10 minutes a day. And basically, it's just a matter of getting used to it, but we need to start somewhere. So these are these incredible prayers. So what is this? What do these lines here say? Verse 4, line 3 and 4. Well, first of all, their minds, bodhisattvas' minds on that level fall under compassion sway, yearning to set free every transmigrating being. Yes, that's the basis. Great compassion. And of course, bodhicitta, yearning to set free every transmigrating being. And then through intense dedication. So to put this into practice, to now practice, to make prayers, these aspirations. Love is an aspiration, compassion is an aspiration. So these prayers are not talking about the words prayers as such, but to move our mind, to create the causes for our mind to go in the right direction. And this bodhisattva, through this he or she, abides in perfect joy. The first ground is called perfect joy, great joy. Very important. Joy is very important. So you start off with great joy. Joy is so important because if we're sad and depressed and so forth, it's much harder to practice the Dharma. Okay, so this is also, I think, a very important part of Buddhist practice. Are you practicing in the right way or in a wrong way? As a result of your meditation, you feel terribly depressed. Well, something went wrong, obviously. Buddhist practice should actually be such that although there's hardship, etc., but you find your mind is more content, more peaceful, which is just another way of saying more joyful. I'm not talking about the joy of getting a new pair of jeans or a new car, not that kind of joy, which is just more of an excitement. Here it's joy, which comes along with this sense of inner peace, with a sense of it's good, you're content and calm. And this is what here on the fourth, on this ground, the joy, first of all, understanding how phenomena really exist. Although this person is not yet enlightened, there's still so much work to be done, but it's understanding how phenomena really exist in combination with this great compassion. It gives incredible joy, which means if we do a little bit of that, we get a little bit joy. It's not like, oh my God, I'll be depressed until I reach the path of seeing and then things turn rosy and everything will be, wonderful and joyful. No, actually the good part of Buddhist practice is, and that's why I want you so much to practice this great compassion. I want you to, as it's described in the scriptures, to experience the sense of joy, of contentment, of a deep sense of no matter what happens, in the end, it's just superficial. Deep within, you feel calm and content. And samsaric suffering is just like the weather, right? It comes and goes, it comes and goes. So it doesn't affect you. It gives you this resilience, this emotional resilience. This is the kind of joy that you start off with, but as you go along, this joy will grow. It will grow deeper. Things can no longer affect you in the same way. You've got this immune system, like an emotional immune system. Great compassion leads you to an emotional immune system. Just as other chemicals, chemicals as in like, vitamins, etc. They can strengthen your immune system. Likewise here, it's mental states that strengthen your immune system by giving you this joy. And joy is important. Joy, this sense of joy and contentment is really important. It motivates you to go on and continue practicing. Okay? And of course, if we are a content and joyful person, we affect others in that way, right? Of course. So, therefore, those lines here, the Bodhisattva's mind falls under compassion's sway, yearning to set free, okay? Dedication with Samantabhata prayers, abiding in perfect joy. This is called the first ground. Right? So the first kind of descriptions, those verses, they describe these kind of general qualities, okay? Those three. But then it describes other qualities, actually 8 of them, basically. From that point on, having attained this ground, it goes on to say in verse 5, he or she, bodhisattvas, they are hailed by the name bodhisattva alone. Now, of course, you go, wait a minute, they were called bodhisattvas before. They were called bodhisattvas before on the path of accumulation, path of preparation. You're kidding me now. Why are they called bodhisattva now? Well, here it actually means ultimate bodhisattvas. We distinguish between conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. Conventional bodhicitta is bodhicitta as we know it, the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. Ultimate bodhicitta refers to the realization, the experience of emptiness, understanding emptiness, that is conjoined, that is influenced by conventional bodhicitta. Okay, so understanding reality, understanding how phenomena really exist, influenced by the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. It's called conjoined with bodhicitta. I think that's the last thing I'm going to talk about a little bit, this conjoined, very important idea in Buddhism. which before we start meditating, it's a little difficult aspect, but it shows that if you generate compassion early in the morning, if it was strong enough, it will be conjoined, it will be connected to your other states of mind. How can a state of mind be conjoined with another mind if, for instance, not both minds are operating at the same time? Okay, so this is a slightly difficult idea. For some of you who are familiar with that, but you need to think of course, your own mind. We've all heard in the beginning of this class, I talked about Buddhism. You can talk about the scientific aspect, the psychological aspect versus the philosophical and so forth, the religious aspects. So just speaking scientifically, just Buddhist psychology. When we talk about the mind, it seems there's just this one mind because we just say mind. But of course, that's not true. Mind can be categorized into so many different minds, okay? But they're not always operating at the same time. For instance, if you wake up early in the morning and you're not thinking of compassion, then your compassion is not operating. You may just be thinking, oh, I just need a cup of coffee. That's all you're thinking of, cup of coffee or a shower or whatever. So what's operating? The wish to have a coffee, the wish to have a shower, maybe attachment and so forth. However, of course, compassion can arise, right? You remind yourself, all right, my homework was to generate compassion. So, okay, you generate in that moment, you generate compassion. So now your compassion is operating. It's actively there. All right. And then you get distracted by something and your compassion is no longer operating. Well, we all know that, right? Minds come and go. They're no longer operating, but they can still influence our other thoughts. They can still do that, depending on the strength. Now, I'll give you a simple example. I usually give the same example. Very strong emotions. They are very strong emotions. So we want our great compassion to be as strong as the emotions I'm going to talk about now. For instance, let's take the negative part first. You lose someone. You're grieving. You're terribly upset because someone has died. And so there's this very powerful emotion of grief. And that is operating. At times it's actively there, you're grieving, you're thinking about it. But other times you're just making dinner, you're doing other things. Your grieving is not right now operating. It's not actively there. But it influences your actions. When you eat food, it doesn't taste as good as it usually does. When you wear your favorite sweater or you use your favorite perfume or I don't know, whatever, deodorant, whatever you're doing. So it doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't give you a sense of happiness, contentment as it usually does. Why? Because your mind is conjoined. It is influenced by this grief. Okay? So beautiful sky looks gray. Blue sky, usually blue, considered to be blue, beautiful. No, this time it's gray. It looks gray to you. So colors don't have the same effect. Everything is influenced by this very strong grieving. That's on the negative scale. But then you take the positive, you're newly in love. Whoa, it's raining every day, but you love the sky. The food is terrible, but you love every bit of it. Because you're newly in love, the whole mess hasn't started yet, the attachment hasn't started, the jealousy hasn't started yet, all that has not arisen yet. You're just thinking of that person, you're just so happy. And then even though you're not thinking of them, this feeling of being in love, that mental factor, that mind is not operating, but it influences your other experiences. So that's when you can talk of these types of mind being conjoined. Being, in Tibetan, the word is really conjoined. Being influenced would be probably a better term. Being influenced by these states of mind. So they become influenced. If they're not very strong, well, I grieve, maybe if someone dies and I've got a minute of like, oh, what a sad, sad. And then I move on and then never go back to that experience of grieving. So that wouldn't be conjoined. This sense of grievance, like this grieving, as I just described, well, in that case, it doesn't become conjoined with other states of mind. Also falling in love, you have like, for a few moments, you're infatuated with another person and then you move on. So again, it doesn't influence you. All right. but they're very strong, like I described, and I think you can all identify with them, and there are other examples, of course, plenty of them. Now, great compassion should be trained to such a degree that it has that same influence, that all your actions are somehow influenced by a great compassion. It becomes conjoined. Okay, so this is why we train. This is why, well, we train. This is why you need to train. You need to train this great compassion. You need to train it. You need to make it so strong that it's just as strong or even stronger than this feeling of being in love with another person. So that all your actions are informed by that type of compassion. Then you talk about it being conjoined, being influenced. It influences everything. All right. So there it influences all your, maybe not all your, making a cup of tea, maybe okay, right? So just ordinary neutral actions. But if possible, they should even, because then they become virtues. If they become influenced by great compassion, that you can think, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he's got these beautiful books where he says, when you make a cup of tea, think you're doing this for the welfare of all sentient beings, right? You're training your mind in that way to train your compassion such that it actually becomes conjoined with every ordinary action, and then an ordinary action of making tea becomes a cause for enlightenment. If, of course, it's also conjoined with the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. Not just great compassion, but of course, the wish to become enlightened. Then that becomes a cause, because it becomes conjoined with bodhicitta, the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. All right, so this here, we're talking about a bodhicitta. Here, conventional bodhicitta, great compassion, of course, is always present in a way, because you wouldn't have bodhicitta without compassion. So here we're talking about a type of mind, conventional bodhicitta, that is so powerful that even your realization of emptiness is totally conjoined, is totally influenced by this bodhicitta. And that is called ultimate bodhicitta, the realization of emptiness that is influenced by conventional bodhicitta. And that mind is more powerful. It's more powerful than just a mere realization of emptiness. It's made very powerful by this compassion. That's just how the mind works. This emotional aspect of compassion and the wisdom aspect, those two, they enhance one another. They strengthen one another. They work together very well because they're both based on reality. Okay. All right. So therefore, from that point on, it says in verse 5, having attained this ground, the first time when you realize emptiness directly, this person is hailed by the name ultimate bodhisattva. Here the word ultimate is not there because the verse meter, it would have disturbed, but in the commentaries it always says this person is an ultimate bodhisattva. Direct experience of emptiness, totally influenced by the mind of enlightenment. That's called an ultimate bodhisattva. That's a person who's reached the first ground. That's a person who's got another 9 ahead of them, and then they're enlightened. Okay, great. All right, so that should be enough for today. Just briefly to summarize before we do the meditation. We talked about, of course, compassion being the root of everything, being the root cause of all great beings, even the hearers and solitary realizers who, of course, have reached that state because of Buddhas, and Buddhas have arisen from great compassion. We talked about compassion being important in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, always being important. We've also spoke about how do we generate compassion by understanding that sentient beings, there are no evil sentient beings. There are only sentient beings being misguided by their misapprehensions, which leads to all their other problems. But also we talked about compassion needing to be conjoined with an understanding of the impermanence of sentient beings, the emptiness of sentient beings. And based on that compassion, we can, of course, that gives rise to bodhicitta. Then, if we continue practicing, we reach the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, and eventually reach state where you directly realize emptiness. And with that, when you directly experience emptiness with bodhicitta, with this mind that's either actively operating or conjoined or influencing all your other types of mind, when you then experience emptiness directly, you're an ultimate bodhisattva. You've reached the first ground. And with this, well, this is where the first chapter really starts. And we're still talking about the qualities before we talk about generosity. But for today, that should be enough. And I want to do a little bit of analytical meditation in preparation for your, well, call it homework, for the exercise or the mental exercise you're supposed to do throughout the week. This time, again, now if you've trained your mind, hopefully in compassion to a certain degree, it's hopefully become easier to now also take the time before you actually generate compassion. You take impermanence. Just reflect upon the impermanence of maybe a particular person. You take a person, reflect upon his or her impermanence, then remind yourself this is true for all other sentient beings. And so as this person, may they be free from all their limitations, from their suffering, but also their limited happiness. May they be free from this limited mind and body. And may I be able to bring this about, okay? To have great compassion, to generate great compassion that was based on that first understanding that all these sentient beings, they're impermanent. Yeah? And if you do this often, if you start off in the morning, you do like a more extended meditation, of course, it's very easy to bring back that thought. Okay, it doesn't take long, a few moments, and you're back into that state of mind. So let's practice this together. I'll do both aspects. First, the impermanence of sentient beings, and then generate compassion. And then next step, reminding yourself that they don't exist inherently. Of course, we've only started, but just as a short meditation on emptiness, and then again, generate compassion. All right, so let's start. A few moments of just breathing to clear our mind, to become more focused, more settled. And then I'll guide you through the meditation. So now bring to mind your initial visualization that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. And think in particular that those people that you don't like or you have a hard time with, that they're right in front of you, sitting right in front of you. Just generate that sense. All sentient beings surround you, and in front of you are those that you have a hard time with. And now bring to mind the fact that those in front of you, as well as all the other limitless sentient beings, they're constantly changing. Their body is never exactly the same as before. And their mind is in a constant flux. Always changing. Their body is moving towards their death, while their mind is constantly having new thoughts, new ideas. Different experiences, one mental factor giving rise to the next. Experience joy, then suffering, then neutral experiences. And then based on your understanding of their impermanence, generate a sense of affection towards all these sentient beings. A sense of care. Generate the wish, may they be free from all their sufferings and all their limitations. And may I be able to bring this about. Try to really feel that deep sense of care, the strong wish. May I be able to help them to free themselves from all their sufferings. Without losing sight of their impermanence. Not just are sentient beings impermanent and never the same from one moment to the next. On top of that, they do not exist objectively and independently the way they appear to our own mind. It seems they have an inherent personality, an inherent nature or soul. Something intrinsic in them that differentiates them from everyone else. But that's just a mistaken appearance. They're merely designated as person based on their body and their mind. But since their mind wants to be happy just like our mind does too, they have the same right to be happy just as we do. And so, again, generate affection that wishes for all these sentient beings to be free from suffering. And then the wish, may I be able to free them from all these sufferings. Without losing sight of the fact that they do not exist in and of themselves, objectively as they appear. If you have a hard time doing both, just alternate between an understanding of their nature and a wish for them to be free from any type of suffering. Okay. All right, so let's now dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated here together as a group by learning about and meditating on this important text. May this become one of the causes for us to generate great compassion, bodhicitta, reach the first ground, and then all the way up to the 10th ground until we become fully enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. And again, with this sense of dedication, without losing that, we'll do the dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the hopeless find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all the medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and the people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. All right. Okay, so, well, please don't forget your homework. Try as much as you can to put this into practice. You've received a lot of instructions. Of course, there are a lot of commentaries on this. You have Lama Tsongkhapa's commentaries. There are other ones as well. If you just look online, there's, I think, by Mipam Rinpoche. I have to look it up. I don't remember the exact title now, but it's not that hard to find even English into English translated commentaries. Don't remember now, but I'll make it available for you to know. But of course, you have the draft translation from Geshe Jinpa on Lama Tsongkhapa's text. So that gives you something to think about. But most important is to put it into practice. And you've got a week to do that. So I wish you a wonderful week. And I see you again next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geshe-ma.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Bye. Hi, Amy.
Thank you.
Bye.
What a lovely
Bye.
teaching.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Geshe-la. Geshe-ma. Sorry. What a treat to be with you again. Yeah. Lovely.
So everyone will take a big break. Right.